So now we have a paradox, because if the Quran is the speech of Allah and that's Allah speaking, is Allah speaking to himself? So is Daniel actually a modalist, or is he a polytheist, or does he have a form of a trinity? But his is even worse, because it's not three persons, because each chapter of the Quran has a potentiality of speaking with Allah. So that means his God consists of at least 115 divine persons or divine beings who can interact with one another and appear separately. And this is all from his authentic narrations.
Notice that for this debate, Sam Shamoun had to create a religion, a mockery, something which does not actually exist, in order to argue against the Muslims. No Muslim believes that Allah is 115 persons. Not even the Christians who didn't understand Islam, like John of Damascus, could come up with something so ridiculous. But we will find that this is the case in Christian theology, that God is another being.
They wouldn't address the Trinity at all and the clear logical contradiction of the Trinity that everyone is aware of. They had to bring up these unrelated issues like the uncreatedness of the Quran, or that Allah has hands, for example. This has nothing to do with monotheism. Maybe they don't understand what Tawheed means. Tawheed means one God. It means monotheism. And this is the claim that we're making, that polytheism is the Trinity. The Trinity is polytheism. So tell me how. I want them to explain, since their whole opening statement was bringing up the issue of the uncreatedness of the Quran and the hand of Allah. How does that contradict monotheism?
Christ does not have a human person, and that's why the notion about divine mind is a two-mind scenario where he shares a divine mind with the Father, and he has limitations in his human mind. That's why it's two minds. So you tried to say that he had one mind. The argument about attributes was not that you believe that they're persons. Sam was making an analogy to show that you have the exact same problem in your position, and you have a double standard when you try to say that we have to solve this Trinitarian dilemma. It's a contradiction. But your view of the attributes is not subject to that problem. That's just a double standard. What's the point? Nobody said that you believe that the attributes are persons, so that's a misdirection.
That is why it is highly recommended to sync up with your heretical Catholic teammate before the debate.
Maybe you didn't hear what I said. The Quran must have a mind independent from your God if the Quran is going to argue with your God and the individual chapters.
Nobody said that you believe that the attributes are persons, so that's a misdirection.
The Quran must have a mind independent from your God, but then it gets worse for you. Recite the two bright ones, Al-Baqarah and Surah Imran, chapters 2 and 3. For on the day of resurrection, they will come as two clouds or two shades or two flocks of birds in ranks, pleading for those who recite them. Pleading with who? With themselves? If the surahs of the Quran can appear independently, separately, and appear in visible form, and argue with Allah, that's either your God being schizophrenic, arguing with himself in different modes, so you're a modalist, or you have now separate gods arguing with one another, so you're a polytheist, or you have to believe that Tawheed encompasses a plurality of distinct entities who can then interact and argue with one another. So don't run and evade with your smoke and mirror tactics. So yeah, Daniel, remember what the topic is. I know maybe sometimes being a little intimidated, you forget. Trinity versus Tawheed.
10 seconds.
Don't run from shouldering the burden of proof.
Intimidated? Brother Daniel looks as chilled as Mr. Freeze himself.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
However, being actually intimidated looks something like this.
We are going to show up at Balboa Park. Uthman Farooq is at Balboa Park. We're going to show up with cameras and we're going to record the showdown. But I'm not going to give you the date because I don't want him to be shaking with fear.
I'm not shaking. Okay. You're shaking, and I'll shake all you guys. What's your name?
My name is Hassamu Shamoun.
Hassamu?
Yes, sir, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to get to know who you are, bro. Why? Has leaves and fruits and all of that. That doesn't mean
God is triune.
Okay.
We don't think of the persons as
okay.
There's a hypostasis.
Sam.
I was waiting for these guys to
all right, how you doing?
So yeah, Daniel, remember what the topic is. I know maybe sometimes being a little intimidated, you forget.
Sam wants to make a big deal about the Quran speaking. So he read that hadith. Sam is not familiar with the Quran. So in chapter 36, verse 65, we read in the Quran, on that day we shall seal up their mouths, but their hands will speak to us and their feet bear witness to everything they have done. Does that mean that our hands and feet have minds? Did any Muslim in history ever interpret that verse that the hands and feet of our own bodies have minds, yet they will speak for or against us on the day of judgment? So this is an interpretation that he has that no one has ever made in the history of Islam. But many Christians and theologians and church fathers have debated and discussed the knowledge of Jesus being different from the knowledge of the Father, and the will of Jesus being different from the will of the Father. Jesus has a separate human will, and this is what they will not explain.
It doesn't matter what your scholars say, it's what you can prove. So prove to me that when hands and feet are speak, they're mindless. So now let's take your analogy with the Quran. So a mindless Quran will be engaging Allah. So you're going to have the Quran engaging with Allah, even though it doesn't have a mind of its own. So now we're back to square one.
Look at what Luke 19:40 says. I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. Stones will cry out according to the New Testament. Do the stones have minds? Isaiah 55:12, you will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Does that mean that the hills and the trees have minds? Sam, explain that. Or how about Psalm 98:8? Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the mountains sing together for joy. Does that mean that the rivers have hands and they're clapping for joy? Do they have minds? Sam, please explain all of those verses. You want to have that kind of understanding of mountains, rivers, and whatever, and you'll say that these are not minds. But the problem with the Trinity is that Jesus has a separate mind than the Father. The Father has a separate mind from Jesus. They both have a separate mind from the Holy Spirit. That means they're three separate entities.
Tawhid versus Trinity, where you guys have open dialogue with each other, and I can put 4 to 5 minutes on the clock.
That's even better. Then I can corner them. They can't run. That'll be great.
So
yeah, so again, Jesus doesn't have a separate divine mind. He shares the same divine mind as the Father. And when he assumed human nature, he assumed a human mind. That's part of the fullness of human nature. So we don't say that he's separate, just like the persons of the Trinity are distinct but not separate, just like you believe attributes are distinct, not separate. Now, I know that you can't seem to follow the fact that we're not saying you believe the attributes actually have minds. We're just pointing out that you have the same metaphysical problem, that you have a double standard for saying, I'm not liable to explain that, you have to explain it. And then when we bring that up, every one of your responses on that is a tu quoque.
Guys, you see how desperate Daniel is? And he's talking about we're evading the topic. Read Luke 19:38-40. Let me show you the context as my time is fleeting. There, Jesus is being praised by children, and the scholars are saying, rebuke them. He goes, well, if they were silent, even the stones will cry out. Anyone with any common sense, but I understand it's hard for them to read a text in its literary context. He's using hyperbole, that even if they don't praise me, creation will praise me. That's exactly the context of the Psalms. The psalmist, which is poetic literature, is personifying creation to show that all creation glorifies God, because creation is a testimony to the greatness and existence of God. Nice try with that false analogy, but I want him now, when I engage you, when I ask you, so are you saying to me that when the hadith, not your Quran, says that the surahs will intercede with Allah, that's not literal? Are you saying to me when the Quran will intercede with Allah, that's not literal? I hope you say that.
I'm going to add 30 seconds to the
uncreated,
clock.
right, Daniel?
Yes.
Okay, so the hadiths that I cited, when it says Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Imran will appear as flocks of birds interceding for those that recited them. Do you take that metaphorically or do you take it actually?
This is a personification of the Quran, just like the Bible verses that I mentioned about rivers clapping their hands, their stones
Where does it
speaking.
say that?
In the Psalms, I'll read them again. In
No,
Luke,
not the Psalm, hadith.
yeah,
Where
so
does it say it's a
you're making the claim that if the Quran is personified, that means it has a separate mind.
So
and I put the point to,
personification,
and I see now you're interrupting.
No, because I want you to
Can I
define
answer?
personification.
Can I answer the question?
Good. Good.
Allow me to break the ice. My name is Freeze. Learn it well, for it's the chilling sound of your doom.
So I pointed out that just because there's personification, that doesn't imply that there's a separate mind. And I cited verses of the Bible. Your response, Your response was that, no, this is just personification in the Bible. So personification is okay in the Bible. That doesn't imply that
Stop
the Bible,
attacking
that
Strawman,
stones have minds and that rivers have minds.
attacking
That's
Strawman.
that's fine.
Okay,
but if the
can I
Quran
address
does it,
your,
or if Hadith
Strawman?
do it, see,
Can
you
I
just
address
interrupt
your
my
position?
answer.
Your position is
He
that you
asked a
called them
question.
parts.
You
Can
asked.
I
called them
address your
parts.
position, or are you going to rant and rave because you want to eat up time?
So
You
can we
interrupt
answer?
me when I'm answering you. You
No,
You
interrupt.
asked the question. Shouldn't we be able to ask now?
وأوحينا إلى موسى أن ألق عصاك فإذا هي تلقف ما يأفكون فوقع الحق وبطل ما كانوا يعملون فغلبوا هنالك وانقلبوا صاغرين وألقي السحرة ساجدين قالوا آمنا برب العالمين رب موسى وهارون